Montana Territory. Spring of 1879. The wind came down from the crazy mountains sharp with snow, but the sun was already warm on Dillon Everett's back as he tied his horse to the post outside the Miles City Trading Square. He had not planned on staying long. Just needed some salt, maybe a new whetstone. He did not like towns much, too many eyes, too many voices. He liked the quiet of his own land, the steady rhythm of cattle and creaking saddle leather. But the crowd gathering near the auction block made him pause. That was no place for cattle today. No wagons or horses up for trade. Just a woman barefoot, dusty and visibly pregnant, her belly round beneath a torn brown dress. She stood with her shoulders pulled straight, chin lifted, though her hands trembled where they gripped the edge of the platform. A man in a brown coat called out prices. She can cook, clean, and do field work. Already carrying, so no waiting to start a family. Who'll take her? Dillon blinked. He had heard stories about such auctions: widows, runaways, poor souls with nowhere to go, but never seen one for himself. Not in Miles City. Not like this. The woman's eyes searched the crowd. Men looked her over like she was livestock. A few offered bids. Others laughed. She did not flinch, even when a man with tobacco-stained teeth shouted something about breaking her spirit. Dillon stepped forward before he could think twice. $20, he said, voice low but steady. The auctioneer squinted. You, never seen you take interest in a woman. Everett still stands. Silence fell. No one raised the bid. The woman's eyes met his, then green, tired but strong. He saw the fear behind them and something else. Grit. Sold, the man clapped his hands. To the cowboy who never wanted a bride. The crowd chuckled. Dillon ignored them. He walked to the steps, took off his hat, and held out a hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. It was small, calloused, warm. Name's Dillon Everett, he said. She nodded. Mae Fletcher. Do you have anything with you? Just this. She turned and picked up a worn leather satchel from the corner of the platform. He nodded and helped her down. They walked to his horse, the crowd already losing interest. Dillon lifted her gently into the saddle, then mounted behind her. She tensed at first, but did not pull away. He did not ask questions. She did not offer answers. They rode in silence until the town was gone behind them. The sun dipped low, casting golden light over the rolling hills ahead. At the edge of his land he slowed. You hungry? Mae nodded. I will start a fire. You can rest inside. She looked at the small cabin, weathered but clean, smoke already rising from the chimney. You live here alone? Always have. She studied him a moment. Why did you buy me? He untied his coat and handed it to her. Because no one should be standing on a block like that, not carrying a child. Not ever. She took the coat, eyes softening, and followed him inside. The cabin smelled like pine and coffee. Dillon ladled stew into 2 bowls while Mae sat stiffly at the table. He noticed how she winced slightly as she adjusted on the bench. How far along are you? 7 months. You got a name picked? She looked down at her bowl. If it is a girl, maybe Violet. I always liked that name. He nodded. Violet's a good name. She looked up. You really do not want a wife? No. Then what happens now? You sleep in the bed. I will take the floor. Mae's eyes narrowed, confused. You are not going to touch me? No. She stared at him for a long moment before nodding. All right. Thank you, Dillon. Eat your stew. She did. That night Mae lay in his bed, one hand resting over her belly. Dillon stretched on the floor, boots off, rifle within reach. He could hear her breathing slow over time. He did not want a bride. He had buried enough people he cared about. He did not need more to lose, but when her quiet voice broke the silence in the dark, something shifted. You saved me today. You do not owe me anything, he said. I know, but I still wanted to say it. He looked toward the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. Then he closed his eyes. Good night, Mae. Good night, Dillon. and for the first time in a long while he did not feel entirely alone. The next morning, Mae rose before the rooster even stirred, easing herself up from the straw mattress with a hand braced against the wall. Her back ached from the ride, and her legs still held the stiffness of too many days sleeping under nothing but sky. But her body remembered the rhythm of work. She found the wash basin near the hearth and poured water from the kettle hanging above the coals. Dillon was already outside. She spotted him through the small window, splitting wood near the edge of the barn, sleeves rolled up, rhythm steady. The axe blade bit clean into the stump, over and over like breathing. She didn't know what to make of him. He hadn't asked where she'd come from. Hadn't touched her, questioned her, or even tried to talk much. Just made sure there was food and a place to sleep. A man like that was either hiding something or had already lost too much to ask for more. She found a clean cloth and dried her face. The baby kicked, a slow roll beneath her ribs. She pressed a hand there, whispering without sound. Then she set about finding a way to be useful. By the time Dillon came back in, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm, she had swept out the hearth's ashes, folded the bedding, and set a pot of cornmeal to simmer. "You didn't have to do that," he said, brushing the dirt from his boots at the door. "I needed to move," she said. "Sitting around makes the ache worse." He nodded once, then stepped inside. The cabin smelled faintly of pine smoke and boiling grain. He sat down at the table, not speaking until she joined him. "You got kin somewhere," she stirred her bowl slowly. "No one left." He didn't press. She appreciated that after breakfast he brought her a pair of worn boots and a shawl from a chest near the window. "They're my sisters," he said. "She passed some years back. Might not fit perfect, but better than none." Mae ran her thumb over the stitching. "Thank you." He looked away as though the mention of his sister had opened something he hadn't meant to show. Later, they walked the property together. She asked questions about the pasture eland, the cattle he kept, the nearest water source. He answered plainly, pointing out landmarks and dangers alike where the soil turned soft after rain, where wolves sometimes circled during calving season. When they reached a stretch of cottonwoods by a shallow stream, she slowed and leaned against a trunk, catching her breath. Dillon crouched nearby, checking a broken fence line. "You were a farmer's wife," he said after a while. She didn't answer right away. Wind stirred the leaves overhead. "No," she said. "My husband worked freight, mules and wagons. He died crossing the Yellowstone last winter." Dillon didn't look up. "Rivers claimed more than her share. I was following the route we'd planned. Figured if I kept moving, something might make sense again." He straightened, resting his hands on the top rail. "Well, you stopped now." "I guess I did." They walked back in silence. The land around them quieted into early afternoon, bees humming low over wild grass. She noticed the rhythm of his steps, deliberate, not rushed. A man used to long work and longer silences. At the cabin, she paused at the threshold. "You don't have to keep me," she said. "Once the baby's here, I'll find a place." Dillon's jaw worked slightly, like he was chewing something unsaid. He unlatched the gate to the corral before replying. "See how things are, once that time comes." She watched him a moment longer before going inside. That evening, she mended a tear in one of his shirts by the fire, her stitches small and careful. He said nothing when he saw it laid out folded by his chair. They didn't speak much that night. But when a gust of wind rattled the shutters and woke her, she found herself listening for his breath across the room, slow, steady, close. And when the baby kicked hard near her ribs, she whispered a name again. Not Violet this time, Emma. Her mother's name, just in case. The fire burned low, and she drifted into sleep with the sound of wood creaking gently in the wind and the knowledge that, for now, she was not alone. Mae spent the next few days learning the rhythm of the place, not through words, but by watching how Dillon moved through it. He didn't give direction, but he never stopped her when she took up small tasks. She gathered eggs from the hens, soaked beans for the next day's supper, and swept the porch clear of leaves without being asked. He'd glance her way sometimes, not with judgment, just quiet observation, like he was still deciding what to make of her. One morning, a horse came up the trail. Mae was in the root cellar, sorting through the last of the preserved squash, when the sound of hooves on dry earth reached her. She stepped out, squinting against the sun. A man in a brown vest rode up, his beard peppered with gray. He dismounted without hurry and tied his reins to the post. "Didn't expect to find a lady here," he said, tipping his hat. Mae nodded, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. "I'm staying on a while. You looking for Dillon?" "That I am. Name's Joel Carver. I run cattle south of the Tongue. Dillon and I trade stock every spring." Dillon stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're early," he said, not unkindly but without surprise. "Storm's coming through next week. Thought I'd get a head start." Joel's eyes flicked back to me, then to Dillon. "You takin' boarders now?" Dillon didn't answer right away. "She's here under my roof. That's all that matters." Joel raised his brows but didn't press. "Fair enough." Mae excused herself and went back inside to give them space. She stirred the stew and added dried thyme from the bundle hanging by the window. Through the open shutters, she caught pieces of their conversation, talk of cattle prices. A fence washed out near Powder River. Someone's wagon overturned near Fort Keogh. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of rust, Joel stayed for supper. He ate without complaint and complimented the beans, though Mae knew they were nothing special. He talked more than Dillon did, filling the room with easy stories. Mae listened quietly, curious. "Never thought I'd see the day Dillon Everett shared his table with anyone," Joel said, pushing back from his plate. "Let alone someone with a babe on the way." Mae folded her hands. "Stranger things have happened, I suppose," Joel chuckled. "That they have." After he left, Dillon stood on the porch for a long time, eyes fixed on the horizon. Mae joined him, wrapping the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You don't have to explain anything to folks," she said. "I know." She looked out into the dark. "But it's kind of you to say what you did." "About me being under your roof." "You are." They stood in the hush that followed, the only sound the wind stirring through the grass. After a while, Dillon shifted slightly. "Joel's got an extra heifer I might buy. Could help once the baby comes." Mae turned her head toward him. "You thinking that far ahead?" He didn't look at her. "Seems foolish not to." She wanted to ask what that might mean for her, for the child, but something about his quiet steadiness told her not to press. He wasn't a man who said more than he meant. That night, as she lay in the bed and listened to the slow creak of the floorboards beneath his cot, she thought about the way he'd spoken up in front of Joel. Not with pride or claim, just certainty. She hadn't felt claimed, but she had felt safe. The next morning, she woke to a folded note beside a strip of clean cloth and a small tin of salve. Dillon had gone to trade with Joel but left word he'd be back by dusk. The handwriting was blocky, the letters carefully shaped, for the aches. "Use the salve on your back." "I'll bring sugar if Carver's still got it." Mae touched the tin, then glanced out the window toward the barn. Empty. Quiet. She smiled just a little before standing up to begin the day. The storm arrived that night, slow and brooding. Long before rain touched the earth, lightning stitched silent cracks across the sky, and the air thickened with the smell of iron and soil. Mae stood at the window, watching the clouds drag their weight over the hills. Her hands pressed into her lower back. The baby had been quiet most of the evening, curled low, not restless like usual. She shifted her weight carefully and turned when the door opened. Dillon stepped in, coat damp, hat dusted with grit from the wind. He set a burlap sack on the table and unfastened his collar. "Got the sugar," he said, voice quieter than usual. "And flour." Joel threw in some dried apples. She crossed to the table, untying the sack. The scent of the apples hit her first faint but clean, like something from another season. You didn't have to go all that way for fruit. "You've not had anything sweet since you got here." She folded the sack closed and reached for a tin cup. The wind's shifting. Might be hail before morning. Barns secured. Chickens are in. The candle between them flickered as the wind pressed against the walls. Mae poured hot water into the cup, letting dried mint steep. She didn't sit. "You've been kind, Dillon, but I need to start thinking about what comes after." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His eyes followed the steam rising from the cup. "You want to leave?" "I don't know what I want. I only know I can't stay somewhere just because it's quiet." "I didn't ask you to." "No," she said gently. "You didn't, that's the trouble, you don't ask at all." His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. The candle guttered again. "You said you didn't want a wife." "I still don't." "Then this won't work, not for long." She set the cup down and moved toward the hearth. The baby shifted, slow and heavy. She braced a hand on the mantel, waiting for the ache to ease. Dillon's voice reached her after a pause. "I don't want to bury someone else." She turned, but he kept his eyes on the floor. "My sister was 18. Fever took her before I could fetch help. I buried her under the cottonwoods. Our mother died the same year. And when I rode out east to bring supplies home, I passed a wagon overturned just outside Rosebud. Husband dead. Wife barely breathing. I still hear her calling for someone who wasn't coming back." Mae's voice was low. "You think if you don't care, you won't hurt." He looked up at her then. The candlelight made his face look older, the lines carved deeper. "I know better than that." She crossed the room slowly. Her hand found the edge of the table. "I've lost, too," she said. "But I never stopped wanting something to come next, even if it hurts." Outside, wind bent the trees until they groaned. Dillon stepped forward and pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded scrap of oilcloth. He unwrapped it on the table to reveal a small wooden carving, a horse, no bigger than her palm. Its legs were worn smooth, the grain tight and fine. "Was going to give this to Joel's boy, but I reckon your child might need it more." Mae reached out, touched the carved mane with her fingertips. "Did you make it?" He nodded once. She looked up at him, and for the first time there was no fear between them, no guardedness. Just two people standing in the same quiet, both worn by different kinds of weather. "You don't have to be alone just because you're used to it," she said. The wind howled against the shutters, but inside the fire held steady. Dillon didn't answer right away. He took off his coat, hung it by the door, then moved toward her with a kind of hesitation that came from years of silence, not uncertainty. "You can stay as long as you want, Mae," he said. "And if you decide to leave, I won't stop you, but I'd rather you didn't." She reached for his hand. It was rough, calloused, and warm. "I'd rather not, either." They stood like that until the candle burned low and the wind began to quiet. And when they finally let the stillness settle between them, it wasn't empty anymore. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed and quiet. The air held that startling clarity that only comes after hard weather. Mud glistened in the tracks outside. And the creek behind the barn ran higher than usual, tugging at its banks with restless fingers. Mae stood at the basin, drying her hands when Dillon came in carrying a bundle of firewood. He didn't speak as he stacked it by the hearth, but his sleeves were damp and his boots left a trail of clean water on the floorboards. Mae watched him a moment, then turned back to the stove. "I've been thinking," she said, not turning around. "About what comes after." He brushed his hands on his trousers and waited. "I want to raise the child here," she said. "If you'll have us." Dillon's brow furrowed slightly. "You sure?" She faced him now. I'm not wandering anymore. I've had enough of that. And I've come to know the sound of this place. It's steady and you. Her voice caught and she steadied it. You don't make promises easy, that makes them mean more. He nodded once. Then again, slower. You'll be treated right, both of you. Mae stepped closer. I know. They didn't touch, not yet, but something passed between them, settled, felt, and understood. That afternoon, Dillon rode out to the south pasture to check the fence line. Mae stayed behind, stripping old wax from the window panes with a dull blade and humming under her breath. Her body moved slower these days. The baby rested low, and her breath shortened when she bent too long. But still she moved, not out of obligation, but because she wanted their home to be clean and ready. By the time he returned, the sun was low and a soft wind had picked up. He dismounted with care, leading the horse to the trough before heading inside. I found a stand of wild plum near the edge of the ridge, he said, brushing dust from his sleeves. They'll bloom soon. Might be worth picking when the fruit comes on. Mae looked up from her sewing. We could make preserves. We could. That evening they shared supper, the silence between them no longer cautious but easy. Dillon set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking too, he said. There's a preacher comes through every month, rides circuit from Billings. He'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Mae's finger paused on the hem she was stitching. Are you asking me? Dillon's eyes held hers. I am. She set the sewing aside and rose slowly. When she reached him, she placed her hand over his. Then I'm saying yes. 2 weeks later, they stood beneath the cottonwoods behind the house, the same place where Dillon had once buried his sister. The preacher's voice was sure and steady, and the words he spoke were simple. Mae wore a blue dress made from fabric Dillon had traded for in town, and her hair was pinned back with care. They exchanged no rings, just vows, spoken plain. Joel Carver came as a witness, bringing his wife and boy. They brought a basket of eggs and a jar of honey as gifts. Joel's wife kissed Mae's cheek and whispered, "You've found a good man." Mae nodded and whispered back, "So have I." Later, as dusk fell and the guests rode off, Dillon and Mae sat on the porch, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "You've built a quiet life here," she said. "But I don't think it'll stay quiet for long." He looked down at her. "I don't mind." Her hand rested over her belly. "She's coming soon, I feel it." Dillon placed his hand over hers, steady and warm. "We're ready." She tilted her face toward his, and when he kissed her slow, certain it was not the beginning of something, but the confirmation of what had already grown between them in silence and work and weather. Weeks passed. Mae gave birth on a clear morning, with Dillon at her side and Joel's wife helping. The baby came with a full head of dark hair and lungs strong enough to wake the birds. They named her Emma, just as Mae had once whispered into the dark. The crib sat near the hearth, and at night Dillon would rise quietly to check on her, his steps soft across the floor. Mae watched him sometimes, half asleep, the firelight touching the edges of his face. He would rest a hand against his daughter's chest, just to feel her breath. In the spring, the wild plum trees bloomed. Dillon built a small bench beneath them, and Mae would sit there with Emma in her arms, watching the wind carry petals across the grass. She sang sometimes, soft and low, songs she remembered from her childhood. By summer's end, the cabin held laughter where once there had only been silence. Clothes dried on the line, and a garden sprouted slow but sure beside the porch. Dillon carved more toys, wooden animals, a tiny cart with wheels that turned true. Mae kept the first one, the little horse, on the mantel beside the lamp. They never spoke much of the lives they'd lived before, not because they wanted to forget, but because what they had now was full enough. Each day brought its own work, its own rhythm, and in that rhythm they found peace. And every night when the fire burned low and the child slept easy, they lay beside each other, hands entwined beneath the quilt, hearts steady, together. Always.